They always thought I was the quiet one, the librarian who chose dusty archives over legacy and leverage. But while they chased headlines, I built something else. Something silent, strategic, powerful. This isn't just a story about revenge or recognition. It's about knowledge, timing, and rewriting the rules on my own terms. My name is Eliza Maddox. And this is how it began. Buried in the quiet stacks of the Pacific Grove Maritime Archive, I was leafing through a first edition of Captain Cook's Voyages when a familiar voice cut through the silence like a fishing line snapping under pressure. "Still playing museum keeper, Eliza?" my brother Graham said from the doorway, smirking like he owned the place. "Ever think about living in the real world?" I glanced up to find him dressed in a steel gray suit that probably cost more than my annual rent, his Rolex gleaming under the reading lamp. Some things never changed. His cologne, a sharp, citrusy arrogance, hit before he even stepped inside. "Hello, Graham," I replied, carefully sliding the volume back into its climate-controlled display drawer. "Didn't expect to see you somewhere without champagne or shareholder presentations." He stepped fully into the room, eyeing the preserved ship logs and antique sextants like they were beneath him. "Dad sent me. He's nervous you'll show up to their 35th anniversary dinner and ruin the mood." His lips twisted. "You know how he is, still doesn't understand why you left New York." Archivist doesn't quite roll off the tongue during cocktail party intros. Eliza Maddox, 41. Director of the Pacific Grove Maritime Archive. To the Maddox family, owners of Maddox Holdings, a legacy real estate empire in 5 countries, I've always been the outlier. They chase profit, headlines, and power. I collect history, patterns, and truth. "I'll be there," I said coolly, standing to meet his gaze. "And don't worry, I'll make sure I don't offend anyone's net worth." "Good," he said, his grin sharp as glass. "I'll be announcing our firm's new development initiative. 3 high-tech campuses along the eastern seaboard. It's our boldest move yet." "That's great news," I said, even as a knot formed in my stomach. He studied me for a second as if expecting me to beg for a job. "There's still time to pivot, you know. You've got the brains. We could use someone like you running analytics. At least then you'd be contributing." I almost laughed. If he only knew. What I did here was a cover. Beneath the archive, in a secure sublevel I personally designed, I operated Kepler Node, a stealth mode data intelligence firm currently under government review for a multi-agency counter-fraud initiative. "I'm doing just fine, Graham," I said with a polite smile, walking him back to the threshold. As soon as he left, I returned to my private office. On the surface, it looked like any other historian's room: maps, journals, reference shelves, but behind a reinforced steel door, I powered up my high-security server. The biometric scanner hummed, confirming my identity. A custom interface blinked to life with secure video feeds from Seoul, Geneva, and DC. "Good morning, Ms. Maddox," my assistant Gia said through the screen. "The Aquila acquisition file is finalized and waiting on your approval." "Thanks, Gia," I replied, scanning the docs. "Legal?" "All green," she said. "We're ready when you are." "Perfect," I said. The real announcement was mine. I glanced at the antique ship's clock mounted on my office wall, just under 6 hours before my parents' anniversary gala. "Schedule the signing for 8 a.m. tomorrow," I instructed, my voice calm but firm. "And line up the press release for noon." "Already queued," Gia said through the encrypted feed, then hesitated. "Are you sure about the timing?" Graham's smug grin flickered through my mind like a bad dream. That polished arrogance. The casual dismissals. The years of being treated as the eccentric archivist who opted out of real success. "This isn't just business anymore," I said, more to myself than to her. Then clearly, yes. "It's time." I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, the quiet hum of the server rack beside me offering its usual comfort. Kepler Node, known in global intelligence circles only by fragmented codenames and proxies, had grown from a single data-sifting algorithm I designed in grad school into a $62 billion force across predictive AI, infrastructure forensics, and international compliance analytics. All while my family believed I spent my days categorizing sailors' journals and nautical charts. And to be fair, I did. I loved the archive. It grounded me. It also gave me the perfect front. No one questions the woman with ink on her fingers and dusty tomes on her desk. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Don't forget to style your hair. The Westcotts will be there." Ah yes, the Westcotts. Another old money family my father was desperate to impress. "Will do," I replied, tucking the phone away. I shut down the secure system and left through the archive's rear stairwell. My first stop, a private salon hidden inside a nondescript Monterey office suite. Technically, it belonged to Hale and Sage Interiors, a design firm I quietly owned through one of Kepler's shell arms. But for me, it was where I went to shed the dust of misperception. Eliza. Emma greeted me with a bright grin as I stepped inside. The place was serene as always, clean lines, ocean tones, no one else in sight. Perks of silent ownership. The usual today? She asked, gesturing to the chair. Something more formal, I said, settling in. Family thing. As she parted and curled my hair, I scrolled through the final Aquila acquisition contract on my secure phone. By tomorrow morning, Kepler Node would fully absorb the very AI firm Graham had spent 14 months chasing. He thought he was close. He was here earlier, Emma said casually, focused on a curling wand. Your brother. Bragging about buying some major tech company. He's trying to buy it, I replied with a soft smile. There's a difference. She paused, catching my eyes in the mirror. They still think you're the bookworm, huh? For about 12 more hours, I said, my smile widening. After that, they'll finally learn who I really am. And tomorrow, the headlines would do the rest. The midnight blue Marchesa gown skimmed the hardwood floor with every step, elegant, deliberate, quietly powerful. I'd chosen it precisely because it whispered sophistication rather than shouting it. My jewelry was minimal but meaningful. Heirloom pearl earrings from my grandmother and a vintage Vacheron Constantine watch I'd bought years ago under a pseudonym at auction. Everything about my appearance said exactly what my family expected to see, a woman trying to impress. That was the game. I let them think I was still playing it. My phone buzzed in my evening clutch. A message from Gia. Everything's finalized. Press release loaded. We can drop it tonight if you want. I paused. The temptation was there to steal the spotlight during the party Graham had built up in his mind for months. But that wasn't my style. I typed back. No. Let them enjoy themselves. Tomorrow is soon enough. The Maddox estate shimmered under the coastal moonlight, its sweeping stone drive lined with a parade of gleaming status symbols, Range Rovers, Bentleys, a pearl white Lucid. I pulled up in my black Genesis G80. Clean. Classic. Respectable. No one questioned it. Miss Eliza, Harold, our longtime family steward, greeted me at the top of the marble steps. He offered a faint but genuine smile. Your parents are in the West Parlor. Lovely to have you back. Inside, the air buzzed with the usual high society background music, string quartet harmonies floating above the crystal chatter of wine glasses and curated laughter. Monterey's elite were all here tonight, dressed in muted money and measured charm. Eliza, darling, my mother called out across the room, her voice landing like a verdict. You look presentable. From Margot Maddox, that was practically a standing ovation. At 67, she wore power like a second skin. Her silver gown hugged her figure with tailored precision, her diamond cuff catching the chandelier light in just the right way. She moved like a queen, scanning the crowd for allies and opportunities. Happy anniversary, Mom, I said as I leaned in to kiss her cheek. She nodded absently. Your father's by the fireplace. Don't vanish before Graham's announcement, will you? As I wove through the clusters of donors, developers, and wineglass diplomats, I was met with the usual blend of perfumed air kisses and disguised dismissals. You're still at that little archive, aren't you? Cooed Celeste from the Monterey Land Trust, her words sugar-coated in passive condescension. That's so noble. I smiled. Yes, still preserving California's maritime legacy. My tone was light, but I tucked the jab away. Tomorrow they'd see the legacy I was actually preserving. There's my girl, my father boomed from the fireplace, his voice loud enough to startle a senator. Surrounded by retired admirals and old Stanford classmates, he pulled me into a surprisingly firm hug. Still knee-deep in those dusty ship logs, chuckled Richard Westcott, one of his oldest golf buddies. His tone made it clear he thought I was still playing dress-up in a professional world. Still curating the truth, I replied smoothly. One document at a time. Laughter rippled around us, the polite kind people reserved for family members who chose paths they don't understand. Speaking of future leadership, my father said, puffing up. Where's Graham? He's got something big to share tonight. Right on cue, Graham strutted into the room, bathed in self-importance and champagne. His tuxedo was pristine, his watch unmistakably a Patek Philippe, his grin unshakably smug. Everyone, he called out, lifting a glass as conversations faded around him. May I have your attention? He lived for this. He didn't know it yet, but so did I. As many of you know, Graham began, lifting his champagne glass and commanding the center of the room. Maddox Holdings has been expanding rapidly these past few years. His voice was smooth, confident, too loud for the space. The buzz of conversation quieted. Even the string quartet tapered off politely. Tonight, he continued, I'm proud to share that we are finalizing the most ambitious acquisition in our firm's history. By this time next week, Maddox Holdings expects to officially close on the purchase of Aquila Systems. A ripple of gasps, then applause. Someone near the fireplace muttered incredible, while another guest exclaimed that's huge. Champagne glasses clinked in response. My father swelled with pride, beaming like a man watching his legacy secure its next chapter. My mother wiped under one eye with a lace handkerchief, though she'd never been prone to tears. For them, this wasn't just business, it was social currency. I raised my glass quietly and took a slow sip, letting the celebration crust around me. It's not fully signed just yet, Graham admitted, with just enough humility to sound charming. But the contracts are ready. Legal's cleared everything. It's as good as done. That's my son, my father boomed, patting his back. Always knew you'd carry the name into the future. As the crowd clustered around him, offering congratulations and exaggerated admiration, Graham's eyes found me through the crystal and candlelight. He raised his glass again, this time in my direction, and flashed a grin sharpened by years of rivalry. And what about you, Eliza? He called out, loud enough for half the room to hear. Still safeguarding shipwreck diaries while the rest of us build real legacies? A few polite laughs echoed around the room, mostly from people who'd never asked me what I actually did. I met his gaze evenly. I think, I said, pausing just long enough to be heard, you might not want to count your acquisitions before they clear international regulatory review. A few chuckles, hesitant, uncertain, floated out. Graham's grin flickered. Still speaking in riddles, he muttered, the smile not quite reaching his eyes. That's why you'll always be tucked away in some archive. Reading about success instead of living it. Perhaps, I replied, taking another sip. But I take pride in due diligence. His jaw twitched. That phrase always got under his skin. He hated being reminded that precision could be a form of power. Due diligence, he repeated with a smirk. I've got the best legal team in the state. Everything's buttoned up tighter than a defense contract. Then I suppose we'll both have an interesting morning, I said, lifting my glass gently toward him. To progress. He frowned, just slightly, but didn't respond. Before the tension could stretch any further, my mother's voice rang out. Dinner is served. The guests began filing into the dining room, a sea of tailored elegance and inherited influence. The dining table was long polished mahogany, set with vintage crystal and gold trim plates that hadn't seen the light of day since the last campaign fundraiser. I found my seat at the far end, far from the center of attention, just close enough to count. The placement was intentional, subtle, and unmistakable. My mother was never careless with seating charts. Across the room, Graham held court, all charm and bravado, entertaining guests with animated gestures and easy laughs. I smiled where required, nodded through small talk, and let them believe I was exactly who they thought I was. But I knew better. Because tomorrow they'd find out who really closed the Aquila deal. And no amount of seating arrangements would be able to bury that truth. Beside me, Eleanor Westcott leaned in, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier's light as she set down her wine glass. Her hair was swept into a flawless twist, lacquered into immobility. You were always so sharp, Eliza, she said, her voice soft but laced with judgment. Everyone expected you do something remarkable. Why waste all that potential in a government archive? I let the question hang there a moment, letting her own words echo in her mind. Then I replied evenly, books don't just teach us history, Eleanor. They teach us how to see between the lines, to read what's missing. She blinked, clearly unimpressed. Well, at least Graham is doing something that moves markets. She sighed, a theatrical, pitying sound. It must be tough, watching him take the spotlight. It's not as difficult as you might imagine, I said with a gentle smile, reaching for my water glass. I've never needed spotlights to see clearly. Dinner continued much the way I expected, passive praise disguised as compliments, barbed remarks coated in Merlot. Subtle digs about missed opportunities and wasted brilliance softened by the warm lighting and perfectly plated entrees. It was a family tradition, after all, insults dressed up as concern. When dessert arrived, flourless chocolate cake alongside blood orange panna cotta, Graham rose from his seat, champagne flute in hand. To Mom and Dad, he said, his voice rich with the kind of pride that always felt rehearsed. Who taught me everything about drive, discipline, and legacy. He paused dramatically. And to my brilliant sister Eliza, who reminds us that success comes in many forms, some of them louder than others. A ripple of laughter floated across the room, polite, pointed. A few people glanced in my direction. I lifted my glass as well, giving him a gracious nod. My expression stayed neutral, but my thoughts had already shifted to the next morning's press release, scheduled to go live at exactly 8 a.m. Later, as the room loosened with coffee and cognac, Graham found me by the dessert table, swirling an espresso in one hand. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked, smugness oozing from the perfect fold of his tailored lapel. "It's been a lovely evening," I replied smoothly, savoring the final bite of tart. "I'm sure our parents are thrilled." "They are," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Would have been even better if both their kids had something impressive to show." I reached for a chocolate truffle, slowly turning it between my fingers. "Success doesn't always belong to the loudest voice, Graham." He smirked. "Tell that to my portfolio. You still working part-time for the state? What does that pay? Just enough for a new library card." I glanced down at my shoes. "Enough to afford these," I said lightly, letting the soft glint of my Louis Vuitton heels speak for themselves. "I've always had a good eye for investments." He drained the rest of his champagne in one practice motion, tapping his pocket for his phone. "Well, Eliza," he said, already halfway disengaged, "this has been charming, but I've got people to impress and a company to acquire." "A big day tomorrow," I said mildly. He flashed a parting smile and disappeared back into the crowd, already basking in his illusion of victory. Once he was out of view, I pulled my phone discreetly from my clutch and tapped out a quick message to Gia. "Everything on track for tomorrow?" Her reply came within seconds. "All systems go. Press release locked. 8 a.m. sharp. Final numbers available if you want them." "No need," I replied, my fingers calm and steady. "I'll read them in the headlines with everyone else. Before I tell you what happened next, do me a favor. If this story has you hooked even a little, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want to see how this unfolds, the choices I made, the empire I built, and the moment everything flipped, subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. Trust me, it's worth it." A smile pulled at the corner of my mouth as I slipped the phone back inside my bag. Let Graham enjoy his last night atop the pedestal he built for himself. Tomorrow morning he'd wake up to a very different landscape, one he never saw coming. By the time the last flute of champagne had been drained and the final goodbyes exchanged, it was just past midnight. I offered the usual polite farewells, endured one final string of hollow compliments and barely veiled critiques. "You really should think about Graham's offer," my mother whispered as I kissed her cheek. "That advisory position in the Maddox corporate archives would suit you perfectly. Something stable. Appropriate." "I'll think about it," I replied with a warm smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I wouldn't. As I drove home, the city lights flickered across the windshield like embers in motion. Pacific Grove lay quiet under the starlit sky, but I was wide awake. For 8 years I had been the afterthought, the bookish daughter who walked away from legacy and leverage. The archivist. The quiet one. The one who never lived up to her potential. But by sunrise, that story would be rewritten. At exactly 7 a.m., I unlocked the side entrance to the Pacific Grove Maritime Archive, just as I had every weekday morning for nearly a decade. My sensible block heels tapped lightly across the marble floor. Nothing about my routine appeared different. To the world, I was still Eliza Maddox, Director of Historical Preservation, Curator, Paper Pusher, Invisible. But behind the frosted door labeled Staff Only, a different operation was already in motion. Gia was waiting in my office, her dark hair pulled into a no-nonsense braid, tablet in hand. In this building, she was my assistant. But outside these walls, she was COO of Kepler Node, and the quiet architect of our most ambitious expansion yet. "Everything's prepped," she said, stepping inside. "Singapore, Brussels, and Tokyo are all online. Press release goes live in 45 minutes. I set my leather bag down and powered up my secure laptop. The hum of encrypted systems booting up had become as familiar as a heartbeat. "Any movement from Graham's side?" I asked, scrolling through the final Aquila confirmation. Gia grinned. "His lawyers are prepping celebratory statements. Still completely convinced they've closed the deal." I smiled faintly. Let's give them a little longer to enjoy their delusion. At exactly 7:15 a.m., my private line lit up. A soft chime. An international number. I answered. "Ms. Maddox," said a voice through an interpreter. "The Aquila board is assembled and ready for your signature." "Excellent," I replied, already opening the e-signature platform. "Let's begin." The next 10 minutes were swift, surgical. Confirmation codes. Digital seals. Formal notarizations. At precisely 8 a.m. Pacific Time, Kepler Node legally acquired Aquila Systems, including its global patents, proprietary AI models, and R&D centers across 4 continents. Press releases live, Gia announced, tapping her screen. I opened my browser. And there it was. Historian no more, Kepler Node founder revealed as Eliza Maddox in stunning $4.1 billion acquisition of Aquila Systems. The librarian who outsmarted Silicon Valley. Mystery buyer unmasked. Kepler's empire built in silence. Archivist turned tycoon stuns tech world. My phone started vibrating. Over and over. News outlets. Partners. Reporters. Former classmates. People who hadn't spoken to me in years. But the first call, no surprise, was from Graham. What the hell is this? He snapped before I even said hello. His voice was a cocktail of disbelief and fury. Good morning to you too, brother, I replied, stirring a spoon into my coffee. I take it you've seen the news? This is some kind of joke. Kepler Node? You're not the founder. This can't be real. Oh, but it is, I said gently. I have been for 8 years. Silence. I get it, I added, letting the moment settle. It's hard to picture, I know. I mean, I'm just the family librarian, right? On the other end, I could hear frantic movement. Papers flipping. Muffled voices. Someone yelling in the background. Graham was scrambling. I let it play out. After all, he'd spent years writing me off. It was only fair he now watch as I rewrote the ending. But I had a deal, Graham insisted. Everything was in place. Contracts. Signatures. Is that so? I asked, my voice laced with polite curiosity, almost playful. Then you might want to revisit the fine print. There was a pause. We've been in negotiations with Aquila Systems for months. So have we, he fired back. No, I said, cutting him off. My voice hardened as each word landed like a gavel. My team. My company. My empire. Every pause widened the gulf between us. The one I built while you were too busy mocking my work and dismissing my life as academic trivia. Silence. And then click. He hung up. Across the room, Gia turned from her monitor, struggling to suppress the grin tugging at the corner of her mouth. How long do you think before your parents call? I checked the clock. Right on cue. My phone lit up with my mother's name. I took a slow breath and answered. Eliza Madeline Maddox, she snapped, voice like broken glass. What in the world have you done? Good morning to you too, Mom, I replied, cheerful and controlled. I'm a little tied up right now, but we could catch up over dinner. Dinner, she shrieked. Do you have any idea what kind of chaos you've created? Your father's phone hasn't stopped ringing. The Westcotts, the Monterey Yacht Club board, everyone is asking how our quiet little librarian daughter just bought Aquila Systems. In the background, I could hear my father's voice barking instructions, flipping between lines like a panicked stockbroker during a market crash. Tell her to get over here, now, he barked. I'm in meetings all day, I said truthfully. This acquisition is just the beginning. But I'd be happy to host dinner. My place. 6 o'clock. There was a long, stunned pause. You mean that tiny cottage near the harbor? My mother asked, dripping disbelief. No, I replied, smiling as I drafted the message. I mean my penthouse on Miramar Heights. The silence on the other end was louder than any scream. Miramar Heights, she repeated faintly. But that's the most exclusive building in the city. Is it? I said lightly. I hadn't noticed. See you at 6, Mom. I ended the call and let the silence settle around me. 8 years of hiding. Of silence. Of living behind the curtain so I could build something they'd never see coming. And now in one morning it was all unraveling beautifully. My own reflection stared back at me from the laptop screen, steady, calm, unapologetically composed. Ready for phase 3? Gia asked, standing just behind me. I nodded once. Do it. Within minutes, the second press release hit the global wires. The timing was intentional, surgical. Kepler Node completes 3-way innovation merger following Aquila acquisition. Asia's brightest tech firms join U.S. intelligence giant in game-changing alliance. Maddox Empire emerges from the shadows. The deal had been in the works for nearly a year, an intricate, triangulated merger with innovation leaders in Seoul, Singapore, and Tokyo. And we had timed this announcement to follow the Aquila acquisition so that the message couldn't be missed. This wasn't luck. This was strategy. This was legacy. And it belonged to me. The rest of the day moved in deliberate, carefully crafted waves. A private video call with our Tokyo partners to align next phase rollout. A secure legal session to finalize disclosures. And one quiet interview with the San Francisco Business Journal. The reporter had been curious but cautious. You really have a background in library sciences? She asked, almost skeptical. It teaches you to manage chaos, I replied with a calm smile. To recognize patterns. To catalog data at scale. And more than anything, to notice what others miss. She blinked, stunned silent, and then just nodded. By the time my family would step into my penthouse that evening, 2 of the decade's most disruptive business moves would bear the name Eliza Maddox. The world now knew what I had built. And soon, so would the people who had spent their lives pretending I never would. To curate meaning from massive volumes of data. That's the heart of it, I told the reporter. Information is power. Always has been. By 7:10 p.m., I exited through the quiet rear doors of the Pacific Grove Maritime Archive and stepped into the waiting car. Not a town car sent by the family, but a sleek black Range Rover I'd purchased through one of Kepler's private funds, registered to a Shell LLC for security. It didn't take long to reach Miramar Heights. My real home. The penthouse at the top of the tallest building in the city, floor-to-ceiling glass, sunset views over Monterey Bay, biometric security, global satellite connectivity, and a high-speed operations suite that rivaled any major command center. I'd lived there for 6 years, maintaining the illusion of a modest life through the tiny studio I leased near the archive. This was where the empire lived. Where strategy had taken root in silence. At precisely 6 p.m., the elevator chimed and opened onto the private foyer. Graham stepped out first. His energy had shifted, less bravado, more disbelief. Behind him, my mother followed, pale and rigid, and my father trailed in silent contemplation. Even Harold, our long-serving family steward, who accompanied them, looked momentarily shaken. "Welcome to my home," I said simply, motioning toward the massive windows where the sun was casting gold onto the waves. Graham's voice was clipped. "How long?" I moved to the bar and poured myself a neat scotch, my back to them as I spoke. "How long have I been lying?" I clarified. "I haven't. Everything I ever told you was true." I turned to face them, glass in hand. "I am a librarian. I do love history. But I also happen to run a global intelligence and analytics firm." My mother lowered herself onto the edge of the cream leather sectional, her voice shaky. "Why?" she asked. "Why keep this from us? Why the deception? Why let us believe you failed?" "Because," I said, walking over and placing a crystal tumbler filled with elderflower tonic on the table before her, "you never looked beyond the story you'd already decided to believe." Her eyes searched mine, stunned. "You saw a bookish daughter who turned her back on wealth. One who chose silence over ambition." I met her gaze evenly. "But silence isn't weakness. It's strategy." My father had wandered over to the window. He stood there, arms crossed, watching the fading light reflect off glass towers. "All those acquisitions," he murmured. "The anonymous bids. The quiet competitors who undercut us in Tokyo and Berlin." "It was you," Graham said flatly. "Kepler node. You're the one everyone's been trying to identify. The ghost bidder. The silent disruptor. The shadow empire," he added bitterly. "The one reshaping the markets while we were all chasing headlines and handshakes." I allowed myself the smallest smile. "I prefer knowledge empire," I said. "After all, Dad, wasn't it you who used to say that? Knowledge is power." My father finally turned to look at me. And for the first time in years, he didn't look disappointed. Or confused. He looked respectful. "The Aquila deal," he said slowly. "How long? Publicly?" "About 8 months," I replied. "But I had controlling interest in their subsidiaries for over a year." Graham's eyes widened. "You've been playing me?" "Not playing," I said evenly. "Competing? Isn't that what you always wanted? A real contest. A fair fight. One where no one got a head start because of their last name." "It wasn't fair," he snapped, fists clenched. "You had inside access. You kept secrets. You used your invisibility like a weapon." I raised my glass in a quiet toast. "Exactly." He stared at me, jaw tight, like someone trying to rewrite a reality that no longer bent to his expectations. And for once I didn't look away. "You had inside access. Hidden teams. Secret intel," Graham accused, frustration thick in his voice. I let out a soft laugh, the sound echoing across the sleek glass and marble of the penthouse. "You mean the kind of intel you pick up on yachts?" I replied, turning toward him. "Tips whispered during charity galas and over cocktails at the club? All those closed-door golf round rumors you've always bragged about." I set my scotch down on the slate counter with a quiet clink and met his eyes. "No, Graham. I didn't build this by trading favors or polishing egos. I built this with intelligence. With research. With strategy. Every move was calculated. every risk measured. I looked at each of them in turn, my mother, wide-eyed and speechless on the couch, my father, unreadable as he stood by the windows, and Graham, still stunned, his arrogance fraying around the edges. This empire wasn't handed to me, I continued. It was earned. Earned with silence, with systems, with an understanding of information most people are too proud or too busy to learn. The room quieted. Even the sound of the city below seemed to hush. Dinner that evening unfolded like a quiet storm. The plates were cleared, but the conversation stayed raw. My mother kept glancing around the penthouse, trying to connect its elegance with the daughter she had dismissed for years. My father remained mostly silent, clearly reprocessing old assumptions. And Graham, well, the sharp jabs were gone. No more smugness. Just uncertainty. He finally cleared his throat over the last course, a delicate fig tart none of them touched. So he asked, watching me carefully. What's next? I met his gaze. A partnership. His brows rose. Kepler Node already operates at a global level, I said. But your firm? It's still caught in the legacy model, top-down, linear, reactive. You need scale, integration, vision beyond borders and headlines. I'm offering that. To my surprise, my father nodded slowly. Maybe, he said, it's time you learn from her. For a moment, Graham said nothing. Then he picked up a folded document beside his plate, a printed summary I'd handed him earlier, and studied it. By the time we moved into the kitchen to discuss a draft proposal, his tone had shifted from resistant to curious. From skeptical to something closer to respectful. I underestimated you, he said, tapping his fingers against the granite counter. But I'm not making that mistake again. The evening wound down in soft conversation and clinking glass. My mother lingered behind as the others gathered their coats. She turned to me, her tone quiet, vulnerable. Why now, Eliza? She asked. Why tell us everything tonight? I thought for a moment, then answered honestly. Because people need to be reminded that success doesn't always wear suits or wave balance sheets. Sometimes it wears cardigans and carries library cards. To my surprise, Graham, standing near the door, added, and maybe it's a reminder not to judge people by how quiet they are. That one landed harder than I expected. After they left, I stood near the window with Gia, who had just arrived to debrief. The skyline shimmered beneath the stars. The world outside was buzzing, but in here it was just us in the quiet hum of systems recalibrating. Stocks are already reacting, she said, scrolling through updates on her tablet. Analysts are calling the Aquila merger visionary. Some are predicting you'll double valuation by next quarter. I nodded. We both knew the formal integration announcement was days away. There were still negotiations, licensing, back-channel diplomacy. But something bigger had already happened tonight. This wasn't just a business move. It was a reckoning. One that forced my family to see me, not as the footnote to someone else's narrative, but as the one writing the next chapter. And strangely, their response meant something. My mother's misty apology. My father's thoughtful glance. Graham's begrudging admiration. I didn't build my empire for them, but I wasn't immune to the weight of their recognition. The next morning, I walked into the Pacific Grove Maritime Archive at 7:58 a.m., just like I always did. The front desk clerk waved. The same retired history buff asked if the Coastal Wreckage exhibit was still launching next month. And as I walked past the reading room, someone smiled and said, "Morning, Director Maddox." No one mentioned Bloomberg. No one brought up Aquila. And that perhaps was the most satisfying part. Because I was still Eliza. Still the quiet one. Still in love with stories. Only now the world finally knew, some stories just take longer to finish. And that to me was the real victory. Because in a world that worships prestige, titles, and noise, I built something different, something enduring. Not just with capital, but with clarity. Not with status, but with strategy. I was still Eliza Maddox, still the woman who found magic in forgotten maps in maritime logs. Still the librarian with ink on her fingers and quiet on her heels. Only now I was also the architect of a global intelligence empire. Because knowledge? It wears many disguises. And sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one no one thought to watch. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed, told your dreams were cute or impractical, then you already know why I kept building in silence. I didn't do this for applause. I never needed a spotlight. But I did need to prove something. To myself. I needed to know I could create something vast and unshakable, without becoming what the world told me I had to be. And now standing here, fully seen, fully heard, I want to tell you something important. You don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to match someone else's mold to make an impact. If this story resonated with you even a little, drop a comment below. Tell me what you're building, what you're protecting, what you're quietly proud of in your own corner of the world. As I see you, you matter. And trust me, your story, it's more powerful than you think. Hit subscribe if you want to walk with me through whatever comes next. Because this journey, this rise was never just about power or profit. It was about reclaiming voice, reclaiming value, reclaiming vision. And if you're still waiting for permission to begin, let me offer this. Don't wait to be chosen. Don't wait to be praised. Don't wait to be understood. Build anyway. Keep showing up. Keep learning. Stay curious. You don't owe anyone an explanation for chasing what they can't see. Success, real success, comes from alignment, not approval. So go ahead. Break their expectations. And then quietly own the room. If this story resonated with you even a little, drop a comment below. Tell me what you're building, what you're protecting, what you're quietly proud of in your own corner of the world. As I see you, you matter. And trust me, your story, it's more powerful than you think. Hit subscribe if you want to walk with me through whatever comes next.